I gave her 25 years of my life, and she gave herself to another man. But what she didn't know. I already knew, every lie, every meeting, and I was planning something she'd never see coming. Hey there folks. You ever find yourself asking, what really pushes a spouse to cross that unforgivable line? There are always reasons floating around: boredom, ego, lack of love. But do any of them ever truly excuse betrayal? Today, I'm walking you through the story of a man who had his entire world upended when he uncovered the truth about his wife's infidelity. At first, he was in denial, because who wants to believe the person they love most is lying to them? But reality has a brutal way of kicking in the door. And maybe, just maybe, he'll find a way to take back some of what he lost. Maybe not in the way you'd expect. So stick around because it gets real. And if you're with me on this ride, give this story a like, and hey, don't forget to subscribe. Let's get into it. Brianna sat on the edge of the bed, her gaze locked on Mark, who stood motionless just a few feet away. With a playful grin, she reached forward and began unfastening the buttons on his dress shirt. One by one they came undone until the shirt slid off his shoulders and dropped to the floor. Her lips brushed gently across his chest, then lower, sending a shiver down Mark's spine. His eyes fluttered shut, and a quiet sound escaped his throat, a mixture of surrender and desire. Leaning back into her seat, Brianna smirked in satisfaction while Mark gripped her arms, as if trying to anchor himself in the moment. Soon after, he collapsed onto the bed beside her, breathless from the rush they'd just shared. During a brief lull, Brianna stood and quickly slipped out of the rest of her clothes, joining him again skin against skin. She tugged gently at his hair, guiding him close for another deep, fervent kiss. Her voice came out low and urgent, no more of this slow build-up. I want you right now. Mark didn't hesitate. He leaned into her with the same fire. Minutes passed. The room, now quiet again, held only the sound of their ragged breathing. Eventually they pulled themselves together, sharing a shower in the guest bathroom, dressing and preparing for the day ahead. Just before they stepped out of the bedroom, Brianna pulled Mark in for one last kiss. That was amazing, she whispered. But it can't happen again. Mark just chuckled. You said that last Thursday, remember? But here we are. A flicker of worry crossed her face as she mentioned her husband, Daniel, and how he'd been acting unusually alert lately, asking more questions, paying closer attention. Plus, Mark's wife had tried calling him the week before. All of it made Brianna feel like they were playing with fire. I can't blow up my marriage over this, no matter how good it feels, she confessed. Mark nodded, sighing. Maybe we should cool it for a while, let things settle down. Neither of them really wanted to walk away, but they knew they were crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Back in my office. Yeah, I was the one being lied to. I stared at the laptop screen for a few seconds too long. The footage. The betrayal. Everything I'd feared had just played out right in front of me, undeniable. My fists clenched. I grabbed the laptop, my breath shallow and ragged, and hurled it across the room with a guttural yell. It smashed into the wall, shattering into lifeless pieces. Mark, I muttered. That smug, two-faced coward. He's going to regret every second of this. I was shaking with anger. I couldn't think straight. That's when I heard the door creak open. My assistant, Clare, poked her head in, cautious like she was walking into a lion's den. You all right, Mr. Thompson? She asked gently. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. Yes, Clare, I said, steadying my voice. Sorry if I alarmed you. I just need to clear my head. I'll be heading to the gym. Nothing clears the fog like throwing around some weights. Oh, and could you do me a favor? Let IT know I'll need a replacement laptop. Of course, Mr. Thompson, she said with a nod, ever the professional. I didn't waste a second. Threw on my coat, grabbed my keys, and stormed out the front door, my mind racing with 100 different thoughts. Before I get ahead of myself, let me back up and tell you who I am. My name is Daniel Carter. The woman you saw earlier? That's my wife, Rachel. We've been together for nearly 25 years. Our story goes way back, to our college days actually. We met there, hit it off fast, and after 2 years of dating, we tied the knot not long after graduation. Together, we've raised 3 amazing kids, and for the longest time I believed we had a marriage built on solid ground. I thought we were one of the lucky ones. But that illusion? It started to unravel a few days ago. It began when Clare Morgan, Sam's wife, showed up at my office out of nowhere. She looked tense, like she'd been carrying a secret she could barely hold onto anymore. 3 days before that, my assistant had told me a woman had come by urgently asking to speak with me, said it was personal and had something to do with her husband and my wife. That caught me off guard. I'd only met Clare once before at a corporate dinner. Just small talk really. But something about this visit felt serious. When I spotted her in the hallway, I approached and introduced myself, trying to keep things formal. I'm Daniel Carter. I hear you needed to speak with me? She shook my hand gently. Thank you. But please call me Claire. I nodded and led her into my office, closing the door behind us to keep things private. Once we sat down, she looked me in the eyes. There was pain there but also determination. I'll be upfront with you, she said quietly. I think my husband is sleeping with your wife. And I was hoping you might help me confirm it. I'm not sure if you've noticed anything strange yourself, but I can show you what I've found so far. If you're open to it, maybe we can dig a little deeper, together. That moment hit me like a punch to the chest. I didn't know Sam well, but Rachel? I trusted her. With everything. She was the mother of my children, my partner through every storm. The idea that she could do something like that? It just didn't fit the woman I knew. But even as I sat there doubting, something about Claire's words wouldn't let me ignore the possibility. Then it hit me. I'd installed a tracking app on Rachel's phone about 6 months ago when our oldest got his driver's license. It had become a way to keep tabs on everyone's whereabouts, just in case of emergencies. I pulled out my phone and opened the app. I figured I'd check, if only to prove Claire wrong. But the location data told a different story. Rachel's phone was pinging from an address only 15 minutes away. It wasn't anywhere familiar. Not our kid's school. Not a friend's house. Just a house I didn't recognize. I zoomed in on the map. It didn't mean anything for sure. She could have had a work errand, met a friend, anything. But that knot in my gut? It twisted tighter. And then I remembered something else. That address. We'd passed it once during a Christmas party route when we'd carpooled with another couple. A name popped into my head. So, still, a part of me clung to hope. I didn't want to believe Rachel and Sam were doing something behind our backs. But even I had to admit the signs were starting to pile up. I decided then and there, I was going to talk to Rachel. I needed answers. Whether I wanted to hear them or not. I pulled up the app's full history going back 3 weeks. I told myself I was just looking for a pattern. But deep down, I knew I was about to find more than I bargained for. I noticed something strange in the home security log that wouldn't leave me alone. Rachel had disabled the alarm system at exactly 11:15 a.m. and turned it back on again at 1 p.m. It seemed like nothing at first. But it nagged at me. I started scrolling through the activity history for the next 2 Thursdays, hoping it was just a fluke. But then I saw it, 3 weeks ago. The same pattern. Claire sat silently beside me, her eyes red and swollen, tears sliding down her cheeks. Meanwhile, I paced the floor like a caged animal, mind spinning in every direction. I felt helpless. And then it hit me, our security setup wasn't going to help us anymore. The indoor cameras only recorded when the system was armed. Otherwise, they were just expensive decorations. But Bill, our technician, he had an idea. He explained that we could install discrete, high-resolution cameras in selected areas of the house. Ones that would capture both video and audio, no matter the system status. Without even thinking it over, I said yes. Do it. Rachel had left for work that morning like it was any other day. Bill showed up just after she pulled out of the driveway. Claire and I watched quietly as he worked, assuring us it would be ready by the next day. We didn't say much, just shared the same heavy silence of people holding back a storm. Funny thing is, Rachel and I had met in college. That's where it all started. Now, years later, our daughter Lily had graduated from the same university. Our twin sons, Matt and Jacob, were sophomores there. It wasn't always easy, but watching them follow in our footsteps brought us a quiet kind of pride. Most weeks, on Tuesday and Wednesday nights, I'd stay late at the office. Not because I had to, but because it gave me space to think. I'd sit there, staring at the framed photos on my desk, wondering how I was supposed to bring this up. How do you ask the person you built a life with if they've torn it all down behind your back? Thursday came. Rachel kissed me goodbye that morning, breezing out the door with her usual smile, completely untouched by the suspicion that hung like smoke in my lungs. But I was done waiting. I called up Ted Jackson, a friend of mine from way back. Ted was now a regional VP at the same bank where Rachel and Sam worked. He wasn't just a friend, he was a guy who owed me a couple favors. Over the years, he'd helped fund a handful of my projects, and I figured this might be the time to call one in. I told him I needed a favor, quietly look into an inappropriate relationship that might be unfolding between 2 employees. I'd provide proof, I said. And I knew Ted. Once I handed him that evidence, he'd handle it discreetly and thoroughly. Later that afternoon, Claire met me again. Her face looked calm, but I could tell she was bracing herself. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, opened the footage from the new cameras and turned the volume up. Without a word, I handed it to her. She hesitated, then pressed play. What came next? It was like all the air left the room. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her own voice echoed from the speakers. Sam's laugh. The soft shuffle of clothes. And then the silence that said everything. Claire gasped, the color draining from her face. Oh no, she whispered, voice breaking as she dropped the phone. No, please, no. Honey. She didn't even realize she was speaking. Just pure instinct, shock, shame, grief colliding all at once. I stood there watching her break apart in front of me, and all I could think was, this is real. It's not paranoia. It's not a nightmare. It's the truth. And there's no going back now. I can explain, it's not what you think, Rachel pleaded, her voice barely audible through her sobs. But by then I wasn't having any of it. I'd reached my breaking point. I stared at her, this woman I'd once thought I'd grow old with, and all I could see was betrayal. No, I said, my voice calm but sharp as glass. What it looks like is exactly what it was. And the only thing you regret right now is getting caught. She wasn't remorseful when she was sneaking around. She wasn't crying when she was with him. My heart was pounding so hard I genuinely thought I might collapse right there on the spot. I closed my eyes, counted to 5, and tried to center myself. I wasn't going to fall apart in front of her. When I looked back, she was curled up on the floor, crying, shaking, a shell of herself. But I had to stay composed. I needed to get this over with cleanly. Rachel, I said steadily, you need to understand what's coming next. I told her I'd already spoken to my attorney Roger. The divorce papers were in the works and would be sent to her by early next week. I gave her the facts. Cold. Straightforward. I've made arrangements, I added. My company owns a number of fully furnished apartments across our projects, meant for visiting managers and short-term executives. I've picked one out. I'll be staying there starting tomorrow. It was strange to hear myself say it out loud, that I was moving out of the house we built, the home where we raised our kids. But that home had already stopped feeling like mine the moment she invited someone else into it. Ironically, those apartments had been designed for people just passing through. Now, I'd be the one living out of a suitcase, starting over. What hurt the most wasn't even the affair. It was the deception. Rachel had been sneaking another man into our home for lunch dates behind my back. Right under the same roof we shared meals as a family. This wasn't a messy breakup. This was a decision. I'd made it. I was walking away from her. From us. She kept asking me to hear her out, to understand, to believe there was more to the story. No, I snapped. You had your chance. I'm not listening to any more lies. She broke down again on the other end of the room, and I stepped outside to breathe. I leaned against my car, staring out at nothing, just trying to collect my thoughts. I had to stay grounded. This situation, it was bigger than just me and her. It was about our daughter too. That night I sat down with Lily, our oldest, and told her everything. Not the intimate details, of course, but the truth she deserved. I explained what was happening, what decisions were being made, and why. She cried. And so did I. Katie, Sam's wife, hesitated with her own plans. She worried how a divorce might affect her kids, and what it would do to their already strained marriage. She leaned on me a lot during that time, constantly seeking advice. I tried to be there for her, though I was barely holding myself together. Finally, the day of the deadline came. Roger called to say that Rachel had signed and returned the divorce papers. Now, it was just a matter of waiting the standard 3 months before it became official. Then came one last curveball. Rachel asked to meet before we went to court. I wanted to refuse. Every part of me screamed to just leave it alone. But Roger, always the voice of reason, urged me to hear her out. He said closure mattered. So I agreed. And as I prepared for that final meeting, I thought back to all the mistakes. Not just hers, mine too. I wasn't a perfect husband. I'd made choices during business trips that I'm not proud of. Short-lived affairs. Casual encounters. They didn't mean anything to me then, and they certainly don't now, but I knew they meant something in the bigger picture. I wasn't innocent either. But here's the difference. I never let those choices cross the threshold of our home. I never let them live in our walls. Rachel did. I was furious with Rachel. Furious at the choices she made, the damage she caused to something I thought was unbreakable. But I was equally bitter towards Sam, the man who stepped into our marriage like he had a right to be there. Still, what haunted me more was the reflection I saw in the mirror. Because while I judged them, I was doing the same thing. In the wake of everything, I tried to drown the pain. I tried distractions, denial, and even self-punishment. But no matter what I did, the ache stayed. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat right, couldn't think straight. The life I had built had collapsed. and I was crawling through the rubble trying to find anything left worth holding onto. During all this, the one thing that brought me some peace, oddly enough, was lunch with Claire. Clare Morgan, Sam's wife. She was going through her own version of hell, and somehow our conversations, our shared silence and quiet laughter became a kind of therapy for both of us. It wasn't romantic at first, just human. But as the weeks passed, something shifted. One afternoon over coffee, Claire leaned forward, her eyes searching mine, and said quietly, "I still have needs, Daniel. As a woman. And I'm guessing, you do too." I didn't answer right away. But she could see the truth on my face. She reached across the table, touching my hand gently. "Look, I know this isn't conventional. And I'm not asking for anything messy or complicated. You're a friend and I trust you. That matters more than anything right now." She paused, maybe to give me a chance to say no. "If you're uncomfortable, I understand. I'd never hold it against you." I sat there for a moment, the weight of her offer pressing down on my chest. But strangely it didn't feel wrong. Felt safe. Honest. No pretense. Just two people clinging to something real in the middle of chaos. Later that evening as I pulled into my driveway, I realized something. Maybe this wasn't a mistake. Maybe this was exactly what we both needed. Not just for comfort but for clarity. So I called her. When she answered, I simply said, "It's Daniel. I've thought about what you said, and I'm in. But I need one thing from you." There was a short pause. "What's the condition?" she asked softly. "If we go through with this, I don't want it to feel like some empty hookup. I don't want it to be something we forget about tomorrow. We're going to share this. I need it to mean something. Not forever. Just honest." She was quiet for a beat. Then she whispered, "I want that too." The next weekend we boarded a flight together. As she stepped onto the plane, I looked at her and smiled. "You look incredible," I said sincerely. "Every guy in this airport's going to wish he were me." She laughed, pulling me into a hug and whispering, "You'd better behave yourself, mister, or we'll miss the plane." Once we settled into our seats, she looked at me, eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Okay, so what's the surprise? Where are you taking me, Mr. Carter?" I reached into my jacket and handed her the ticket. She read it, and her jaw dropped. "New York? You serious? I've always dreamed of going there." "Well, Mrs. Morgan, this weekend we've got reservations at some pretty unforgettable restaurants. And maybe, just maybe, I've earned the full girlfriend experience." She looked at me touched, then smiled and said, "That's exactly what I was hoping for." When we landed, we held hands as we explored the city. No hiding, no guilt. Just two people walking together, not trying to rewrite the past but just enjoy the present for what it was. After a while, I leaned in and kissed her. Nothing rushed. Just real. Then I grinned and said, "We should probably grab dinner before we get carried away." She chuckled. "Because otherwise? Otherwise I'll be throwing you on that hotel bed and skipping dinner entirely," I teased. We laughed, arm in arm, and strolled toward the nearest place to eat. The city buzzed around us, alive with noise and light, but for the first time in a long time I felt quiet inside. And that was something I never thought I'd feel again. I'll be honest, I told Daniel I was nervous. It had been a long time since I'd felt this vulnerable with someone. The truth? I'd only ever been with one man before him. And after the way things ended, I'd been carrying around this quiet, heavy sense of inadequacy, like I wasn't enough. Daniel didn't brush it off. He didn't minimize it. Instead, he looked right at me and said, "We all carry our own doubts, Claire. But just because someone failed to love us the right way doesn't mean we're not worthy of it. Their choices, that's on them. They should have talked to us. Tried. But they didn't, and that says more about them than it does about us." He took my hand and smiled gently. "Let's not talk about them anymore. Let's just be here, in this moment. Just us." His words quieted the storm in my chest. That evening, I walked back into the hotel room while he was sorting out his suitcase. He didn't hear me at first, not until the door clicked shut behind me. He turned quickly, and for a second I forgot how to breathe. There he was, standing there with that familiar confidence, but this time it was softer, more real. He walked straight up to me, wrapped his arms around me, and kissed me like we were the only two people in the world. When he pulled back, he grinned. "I think you're overdressed." I laughed, heart racing, and turned around. He carefully unzipped my dress, letting it slide down with a quiet rustle. I stood there for a moment, caught in the intimacy of it all, and then we moved toward the shower. I was almost finished when he surprised me by stepping in behind me. The grin on his face made it pretty clear, he wasn't just there to rinse off. "Don't you ever get tired?" I teased. "Not when a woman like you is standing right in front of me," he replied. That moment turned into something tender and passionate, our connection no longer just emotional, it was physical now too. We didn't rush it. We let it happen naturally, a release of everything we'd both been holding in. Afterward, we washed off the steam, dressed slowly, and headed downstairs for breakfast. The rest of the day was like something out of a dream, walking the city streets hand in hand, eating well, talking about everything and nothing. It felt like real life, but better. Later, as we returned to the room, Daniel's phone buzzed. He picked it up, listened for a moment, then turned to me with a heavy expression. "It's Lily," he said. "She found out." I could see the tension in his eyes as he ran a hand through his hair. "She didn't know we were here," I said gently. "She just wants to talk to you." He nodded, looking older in that moment, weighed down by guilt. I placed a hand on his arm. "Whatever happens next, I'm here. You're not going through this alone." I wrapped a towel around myself and stepped into the bedroom while Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, phone still in hand. He glanced at me, his eyes tired but grateful. There was something so human about that moment. Two people, unsure of what tomorrow would bring, but somehow finding comfort in the present. The next morning, we decided to stay in the city one more day since the room was already paid for. Claire insisted on flying back with me, and I managed to grab 2 seats on a direct afternoon flight. We packed quickly, quietly, and boarded the plane just after noon. As the wheels lifted off the tarmac, Claire reached over, rested her hand on my knee, and laid her head gently on my shoulder. "I feel bad for Matt," she whispered. "He didn't deserve any of this." "He's going to be okay," I replied. "He's strong. Stronger than he knows." She nodded, but I could feel the sadness lingering. "And I'm sorry too," she added softly. "About the weekend. About everything." I looked out the window, then back at her. "Don't be," I said. I think I needed this more than I realized. Claire and I had agreed we'd talk later in the week. We both needed space to breathe, to process what had happened in New York and figure out where to go from here. It wasn't just about that weekend, it was everything leading up to it and everything it might mean after. After I found my car at the airport, I headed straight to the hospital to check in on Matt. My nerves were getting the best of me. I hadn't seen Rachel in nearly 2 months, and I had no idea what I'd say, or how I'd even react to being near her again. But that wasn't even the hardest part. I'd also have to face Lily. I had to explain why her father had been spotted in a hotel room across the country with a woman she didn't even know. It wouldn't be easy, but I owed her the truth, at least the parts she needed to hear. When I reached the room, I paused in the doorway. There was Jeff, my youngest, curled up in a chair near Matt's bed, scrolling through his phone. The moment he noticed me, I smiled and teased, "What? No hug for your old man?" He stood up, cracking a tired grin. "Hey Dad." We embraced. It was quick, but it meant the world to me. "Looks like Matt's going to be out of commission for a while," he said. "But hey, now when you come down to campus, you can finally invite your favorite son for a round of golf, right?" I chuckled. "Looks like your brother won't be tagging along to get jealous anymore." We shared a laugh, and for a brief moment things felt normal. Easy. I glanced over at Matt, lying there with tubes and wires still attached but awake, slowly recovering. He'd be okay, the doctor said. It would just take time. Once he was discharged, Rachel and I, against all odds, helped him get settled back into his room at home. Returning to that house stirred memories I hadn't let myself touch in weeks. But I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't let those ghosts get in the way. Not for Matt's sake. After tucking him in and making sure he had what he needed, I told him I'd be back the next day. As I headed toward the door, Rachel stopped me. "We had an agreement," she said gently. "To talk before the divorce is final." The court date was coming up fast. Part of me wanted to tell her there was nothing left to say, but I knew better. Closure, however painful, was necessary. "All right," I said. "Let me say goodnight to Matt, then we'll talk." Once he was settled again, Rachel and I stepped out onto the patio. The air was cool. She looked anxious, wringing her hands as she searched for the right words. I waited. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "First, I want to say I'm sorry," she began. "I'm sorry about Sam. I'm sorry for the lies, for the pain. I see now that I was the one who broke everything." Her voice trembled. "You didn't deserve this, Daniel. None of it. And I know an apology isn't enough, but I had to say it." I stayed quiet, letting her speak. She took a breath and continued. "I feel like I owe you an explanation. Not to justify what I did, but to make sense of how I ended up there." Eventually, the conversation turned, as I expected, to the idea of blame. She spoke about how lonely she'd felt once the boys left for college, how the silence in the house grew unbearable. She spoke of grief, of emptiness, of old wounds from her childhood resurfacing. I listened even when parts of it didn't sit right with me. I let her talk. Not because I agreed with everything she said, but because she needed to get it out. Maybe, in some way, that helped her find closure. In truth, I think the unraveling started long before either of us realized. And it didn't start with Sam or with New York. It started in those quiet gaps we left unspoken for years. It started when we stopped turning toward each other when things got hard. Rachel's connection with Sam didn't just happen overnight, but once it started, it escalated fast. What began as harmless conversations turned into stolen lunch hours, secret glances, and eventually, something more. I'd later learned that it wasn't long before they were making out in his car like a couple of teenagers hiding from the world. It all became painfully obvious the day they visited Claire and me. I remember watching them, subtle glances, too long touches, the quiet tension between them. I could see it clear as day, they'd crossed the line. And no matter how many times Rachel insisted that it was just physical, something inside me knew better. That kind of deceit doesn't grow from lust alone, it takes loneliness and validation. Two things I apparently stopped giving her a long time ago. That night changed everything. They'd gone over the edge, and instead of pulling back, they made plans, talked about how to keep things from Claire and me. I found text threads between them, whispering lies in pixels. Pretending. Laughing. Plotting. Since then, Claire and I hadn't seen them together in person. But I knew Rachel had been lying. She said she hadn't seen Sam since our separation, but I knew for a fact that he'd been at our house. Twice. On back-to-back Friday nights. Overnight stays. And I wasn't imagining things. The system logs. The car footage. The lights turning off at 2 a.m. I brought it up during one of our final conversations. Her face went pale, and for a moment, I could see the fear settle in her eyes. Rachel, I said calmly, I know you're still seeing him. I know you had him in the house after I left. So let's stop pretending. She opened her mouth but said nothing. So I laid it out clearly. I recommend we finalize the divorce in the nearest court possible and be done with it. I have more than enough evidence to create an entire expose. Let's not drag this out. To my surprise, she agreed. We scheduled the final court date for 2 weeks out. The following week was dedicated to something far more important. Savannah's college graduation. For once, both Rachel and I were in sync. We stood together for our daughter, proud and present. We didn't talk about the past. We focused on her. As a graduation gift, I planned something special, a 2-week cruise around Europe. After that, Savannah would be joining me for a few months, traveling, exploring, and finding some direction before jumping into post-grad life. I needed that time with her, and I think she needed it with me. Claire remained a steady part of my life during all this. She was not just a warm presence. She was also deeply intelligent, grounded, and unexpectedly funny. Our relationship wasn't just about healing, it was about rediscovery. She helped me see myself in ways I'd forgotten. And yes, the chemistry between us was undeniable. Still, one thing lingered: Sam. I couldn't let it go. Not because I wanted revenge for the sake of revenge, but because I believed people like him shouldn't walk away clean. So I came up with an idea. Something symbolic. And I shared it with Claire over dinner. I know this sounds petty, I said, but I want to get to him. Not violently. Just poetically. She looked at me then smiled. What are you thinking? I hesitated. He slept with my wife. The least he can do is buy me a drink. The next time we saw Sam, I waited for the perfect moment. I signaled the waitress. My friend here, I said, motioning toward Claire with a grin, would like to buy us a drink. Bring us your best bourbon, make it a double. Sam had just sat down at the edge of the bench, eyes darting around, clearly unsure what he was walking into. You know, I said casually, if you're going to sleep with a man's wife, the minimum you can do is offer him a strong drink. His face froze. I'm sorry, what? I leaned in, calmly but directly. You remember my comment from earlier? About paying your dues? Well, here's your chance. He blinked. Right, yeah. Okay. Then I pulled out a full bottle from the bag beside me. Here, I said, placing it on the table. A gift. From me to you. After spending the last few months with your ex, I figured this was the least I could do. He didn't know what to say. Claire and I just smiled. Later that night, we laughed about it. Not because we were cruel, but because sometimes healing needs a little comedy. And poetic justice. As for Rachel and Sam, well, Claire and I had stumbled across some very private footage of theirs, saved, no doubt, from earlier escapades. And while I'd never stooped to full-blown exposure, let's just say a few blurred, anonymous clips made their way onto a couple of satirical cheater compilation forums. Was it mature? Probably not. Was it satisfying? Absolutely.